Mr. Kim Dae-hyung, Chairman of the Jeju Chamber of Commerce, Ambassador So Chung-ha, President of the Jeju Peace Institute, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to all of you. First of all, allow me to thank the Jeju Chamber of Commerce and the Jeju Peace Institute for inviting me here, back here to Jeju this morning. And I also want to express my deep appreciation to all of you for turning up so early in the morning for this presentation. When Ambassador So contacted me end of last year to come and do this presentation, I agreed immediately to do this because Ambassador So is a very good friend. We worked very closely together when he was ambassador to Singapore, and I was the Director General for Northeast Asia at the time. So, and actually, I thought that Ambassador So is probably even better qualified than me to give this presentation because after 3 years in Singapore, he probably knows a lot more because, as they say, foreigners always, are able to see a place with more more objectively than somebody who is from that place. Well, anyway, I'm not sure how many of you have been to Singapore, or maybe some of you have been, but may not have been to Singapore recently. So maybe I'm thinking that before I start the actual presentation, I would like to first of all show you a video clip. This video clip was done in 2 years ago in 2015 when we celebrated the 50th anniversary of Singapore's independence. At the time, we invited a very well-known Korean photographer, Mr. Kim Jong-man, to come to Singapore. It was his first trip to Singapore, and we invited him to come to Singapore to do some filming and photography, and so that he can share with our Korean friends the views about Singapore through the lens of a Korean who has come to Singapore for the first time. So if you allow me, I will like to show you this video clip. Yeah.
Happiness of our life through the travel. I was thinking, what is this country? One voice came out through my thoughts. It is like one city nation. We can call city states, but I like better city nation. So how many city nations in these days on the planet? Singapore came first. The Vatican also is a city nation. The Monaco, Luxembourg, will have San Marino, will have Kuwait, will have Bahrain. passionate to look after what is beautiful.
culture of Sky on 27 and in Globalization, Singapore. My cuisine is French Asian, a fusion between French and Asian cuisine. And my philosophy of cuisine basically comes from comfort food, what we eat every day, like in France and in Asia, can be Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Hong Kong. From there, I upgrade, of course, the balance of the whole menu when you come to Downturns in Globalization.
My impression of a city, the nation, is a little bit few just very modern, and also that is powerful. So it's a mixture of culture, I believe. the Singapore is city of the architecture, the futuristic city. The cityscapes is one of the great subjects. I've never been this kind of architecture city like Singapore. They have very good creative dreams about architecture. Finally, I'm going back to my home. I will be shot more than 40,000 images, digital films, Polaroids. We do everything, every time, same way. To one purpose, making better shot, beautiful shot. Whatever it doesn't look like, it doesn't matter. We are the dreamer. We make dreams. And we are the saver. We save the dreams. For the good, we don't cheat. We don't masquerade, We are the honest dreamer. On this earth, on this planet.
Okay, I hope you have enjoyed that short video. I've chosen for today's presentation the title Singapore, Journey to a Global City. This carries two meanings. One is, of course, traveling to Singapore and understanding Singapore. The other meaning is how Singapore has traveled this journey in our development to become a global city. Well, I think to understand what makes a global city, we cannot avoid first talking about globalization. I think globalization is a concept that is not new to all of us. But in the context of today's discussion, globalization refers to the integration of local economies into the world economy through the lowering of barriers to flows of goods, capital, labor, technology, and ideas. A global city is not simply an urban center with good international connections. Unlike a typical city, it does not only serve a specific country or a particular geographical region. Global cities, in fact, Global cities are, in fact, important nodes in the global economic system. They provide the infrastructure, services, resources, and talent for multinational organizations to locate their headquarters and control their international operations. Global cities connect to one another in the form of a network, and together they shape new emerging trends and they direct the flow of goods, capital, and people around the world. Well, long before globalization became a widely recognized concept, Singapore was already a busy seaport and hub for international trade and migration after coming under British colonial rule in the early 19th century. Singapore's location on the Straits of Malacca at the crossroads of the sea lanes between the east and the west made us an ideal transshipment port when merchandise was imported, traded, and re-exported. So traders from many countries came to set up a presence in Singapore, and some of them settled down and became residents in Singapore. And shortly after we became an independent country in 1965, our neighboring countries took measures to reduce their dependence on Singapore as a transshipment port, which at that time accounted for about 20% of our GDP. As a small country with no natural resources, no hinterland, and only a tiny domestic market, the Singapore port was our lifeline. And given these circumstances, turning Singapore into a global city was not just a matter of choosing a development strategy, it's a matter of survival for Singapore. In a speech in 1972, Singapore's first foreign minister, Mr. S. Rajaratnam, set out the vision for Singapore as a global city. He said, and I quote, "If we view Singapore's future not as a regional city, but as a global city, then the smallness of Singapore, the absence of a hinterland or raw materials, and a large domestic market are not fatal or insurmountable handicaps. Singapore's economic future will, as the years go by, become more and more rooted in this global system. It will grow and prosper as this system grows and prospers. It will collapse if this system collapses." These words were spoken about 40 years ago, but today they still remain very much valid. Over the last 50 years, Singapore's vision of becoming a global city has not changed. But the strategies that we adopted had to be adjusted from time to time in tune with the changes in the external environment and our own level of development. When Singapore became independent, our unemployment rate was very high. The population was poorly educated. And like many other developing countries at the time, we adopted an import substitution industrialization policy. But soon after our separation from Malaysia, we realized that this development policy was not sustainable, and we had to switch to an export-oriented strategy. And this is, I say, because of our circumstances of not having a hinterland and a very small domestic market. So in line with our goal of building a global city, the government adopted a free trade regime and created free trade zones where industries can have access to first-rate infrastructure at subsidized rates. A critical part of this strategy was to attract foreign investors, especially multinational corporations, to help develop our manufacturing and financial sectors. And this meant that Singapore had to be well plugged into the international system, and hence the government invested heavily in the development of our seaport, airport, and technological systems. We also offered tax incentives to foreign investors and kept our labor costs relatively low. And in parallel, the government established the Singapore Tourism Board to promote Singapore as a tourist destination. This was done through progressive strategies such as developing garden attractions and modern hotels. Well, the period from the 1980s to the 1990s saw a significant shift in the strategies and a shift to the emphasis on from labor-intensive industries to high technology industries, and the start of a longer-term reorientation to position Singapore as a business gateway to companies that are operating in our region. So in its blueprint for the next phase of the Singapore's economic development, the government unveiled a slew of strategies to grow Singapore into a hub city and a total business center. There was more investment in improving our labor productivity, establishing skill and knowledge-intensive industries and services, and the upgrading of our infrastructure, such as the seaport, airport, industrial parks, transportation system, to world-class standards so that we can compete with other major cities. And in the wake of the Asian financial crisis of the late 1990s, the government increased its efforts to promote investment and deregulated the financial sector to compete with and to gain ground on other international financial centers. So we, instead of becoming cautious and closing up, we actually opened up even more. And the government also placed out some of its budget surpluses to local fund management firms in order to develop Singapore's asset and fund management business. So this has paved the way for Singapore to now be one of the major wealth management centers in the world. Well, in terms of tourism strategy, more effort was put into the preservation and promotion of Singapore's cultural heritage, including distinctive community districts such as Chinatown and Little India, which you saw in the video earlier on. And steps were taken to nurture the creative sector. So in the early years when we were poor and we were developing and had to focus on industrialization, there was not much room and resources to develop the softer side of the economy, the creative sector. So in the 80s and 90s, this is when we started paying more attention. We also realized that in the quest for development, many of the older buildings in Singapore were being destroyed. And this is part of our heritage, which we need to maintain. So this is the period when we started to conserve many of our older buildings as heritage. So the objective of all these measures was to raise the overall quality of life in Singapore, which is critical to attracting talents from around the world to come and participate in our development. The government's strategy was that in order to maintain Singapore's competitive advantage in the era of a knowledge-based economy, we need to bring in a fair share of the foreign talent to augment our own local workforce. But since the year 2000, Singapore has experienced two economic downturns. We went into recession. The first one was in 2001 after the bursting of the dot-com bubble in the US. The second was in 2008, 2009, and this was triggered by the property subprime meltdown in the US. On both occasions, the government convened high-level committees comprising representatives from both the public and private sectors to review and to chart Singapore's economic strategies for the future. So in 2001, the Economic Review Committee was set up and it was tasked to find Singapore's place in a rapidly globalizing world that is besieged by relentless technological changes. Some of the recommendations recommended by the Economic Review Committee included developing a global brand name for Singapore, developing Singapore into a research and development hub for multinational corporations, and to continue to attract global talent. And similarly, after the recession in 2008, the 2009 Economic Strategies Committee was set up, and the committee recommended as one of three key priorities that the government should make is to transform Singapore into a distinctive global city. So some of the specific recommendations made under this priority include attracting top quality people from around the world, to grow our creative and arts clusters, and to develop infrastructure that will deliver a high quality of life in Singapore. So last year, 2016, as we are facing this global slowdown, global economic slowdown, the government established the Committee on Future Economy as part of its efforts to restructure the Singapore economy. The overall objective was to sustain Singapore's longer-term competitiveness given the slowdown in the global economy and the disruption that is brought about by innovation and technological advances. So the Committee for Future Economy made recommendations of 7 strategies, but 2 of the 7 that are relevant to our discussion today include deepening and diversifying Singapore's international connections and developing a vibrant and connected city of opportunity. Now, the key point I want to bring to you, outlining these 3 different periods, is that throughout the years of Singapore's development and the challenges that were posed by the changing external environment, the government has remained steadfast in its vision to build Singapore into a global city. So this vision and this aim has not changed through the years. But successive rounds of review of our development strategies have always included recommendations on how to enhance Singapore's connectivity to the rest of the world and to improve our attractiveness to foreign investors as a base to operate from, and for foreign talent to come and to work and live in Singapore. Before I round off my presentation today, I would like to play another short video clip. You have seen the earlier video, which is how Singapore is seen through the eyes of a Korean. This next video is a short video on how we see what Singapore is and where we are going forward. Okay. To round off today's presentation, I just want to emphasize a few points. The first point is that while global cities around the world may share certain characteristics, but there is no single formula or a set of strategies for building one. A lot depends on the specific circumstances and the background of the city. And in Singapore's case, for example, our geographical location and our multicultural society are some of the more important factors in determining why we embarked on this journey and how we have the strategies that we have chosen. The second point is that among the leading global cities around the world, Singapore is quite unique because we are not only a city, but we are also a sovereign state. This offers us both advantages and disadvantages. For example, as a country, policy making and implementation can be more straightforward as we do not need to coordinate with multiple layers of government. The government also has more freedom to act without being constrained by the need to seek the approval of a higher authority, and especially when it comes to international dealings. But there are also disadvantages being a city-state. One of the more obvious downsides, which I mentioned earlier, is that there is no strategic buffer or a domestic market to fall back on when global conditions turn negative or worse if the global system collapses. So, this has been particularly evident during the 1997 Asian financial crisis and the 2008 US subprime meltdown when Singapore slipped into recession. So the third point that I want to make is that my presentation this morning has mainly focused on the economic aspects of building a global city. And this is only one view of the global city, but in fact there are many other issues that come into play and which needs to be considered. Well, coming back to Mr. Rajaratnam's speech in 1972 again, he said, laying the economic infrastructure of a global city may turn out to be the easiest of the many tasks involved in creating such a city. But the political, social, and cultural adjustments such a city will require to enable men to live happy and useful lives in them may demand a measure of courage, imagination, and intelligence which may or may not be beyond the capacity of its citizens. So in Singapore's journey to become a global city, we have had to face many challenges, some of which we are still now trying to find the solutions for. So one example of this is our immigration policy. So some of you who may be more familiar with Singapore, you know that we have a total resident population of 5.6 million today. But of these 5.6 million, only 3.4 million are Singapore citizens. So what this means is that almost 40% of the people living in Singapore are foreigners. And this is also one of the reasons why we are very much a cosmopolitan city. So the question is, how do you strike a balance between ensuring the welfare and the livelihoods of the citizens, while at the same time welcoming an inflow of foreign talents that can add dynamism to the Singapore workforce and also vibrancy to the Singapore economy? It is a difficult choice. And how do you make sure that the inflow of foreign capital and talent do not lead to a widening of the income gap and the social discontent among displaced workers who have not been able to benefit as much from maintaining such an open system? This is another big question that we are now facing. So these issues that I've outlined are not the only challenges that we encounter in Singapore's transformation from a small trading outpost in the 19th century to a the global city that it is today. But I hope that my presentation has given you at least a better understanding of the choices that we have made along the way. I believe Jeju will have to find its own path to becoming an international city in your own right. But just as Singapore has benefited from the support from other countries in our own journey, we in Singapore look forward to having the opportunity to work with and to participate in Jeju's development as well. So with that, I'd like to thank you. Thank you very much.
네, 감사합니다. 오늘 강연 내용에 대해서 질문하실 분 있으시면 몇 분의 질문을 받도록 하겠습니다. 마이크를 준비해 주시면 좋겠습니다. 혹시 질문하실 분 있습니까? 네, 저 앞쪽에 있어요. 마이크 준비해 주십시오.
Thank you, Ambassador, I enjoyed your presentation. My name is Sung Woo from Jeju Peace Institute. When I enjoyed your presentation, I thought, what is the single most important factor that enabled your economic success? I thought that the global city is the outcome. I think what is the causes of the global city as a symbol of economic success? In my point of view, I thought your credit and trustworthiness from your neighbors, business partners, and your friends, which means Singapore is the right place for my investment and my business partners. That's what, when I compare Jeju cases with the Singaporean cases, how can we achieve the status of international city? That's what we learn from Singapore. As you presented in the presentation, you point out we have nothing in the very early stage of independence. Then how can you get that kind of credit and trustworthiness from your business partners and the neighbor countries around the world? That is my question. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for a very good question. It's not easy for us. I have not had the opportunity to go into a lot of detail. When we first became independent, in another event I mentioned that actually, back in the 60s, what Singapore was like was not too different from what Korea was like around the same time. We were a very poor country. We didn't have any resources. And we don't even have, a market to depend on. So some of you may have seen this old video clip of Mr. Lee Kuan Yew's declaration of Singapore's separation from Malaysia. And he was very emotional because nobody believed that Singapore could survive. So what we had to do was what we need to do to survive. So it's a little bit different from, as I said in the presentation, it is not a development strategy, it's finding ways to survive. And because we didn't have anything of our own, the only way to survive and to move forward is to invite foreigners to come and help us. So that included everything from building up the economy. When we became independent, the British Army pulled out of Singapore. For our own security, we had to invite other countries to help us to set up our military. So it is a very unique set of circumstances, which I don't think is quite relevant in the case of Jeju. And this, I would say that the most important thought of the leaders at that time, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, was pragmatism. He doesn't believe in ideology. So when many developing countries at the time were being protective, choosing an import substitution, you want to restrict imports, you want to restrict foreign companies coming in, because you want to protect your own industries. But we didn't have anything to protect, so we took the other way around, being a very practical approach of inviting people to come, because we didn't have the resources, we have the companies, our people were poor, there were no jobs, housing, the lack of housing, so we went the other direction. We were being very pragmatic. And that has been even until today, it has been the government's philosophy that we don't really care about, specific theories and ideologies. Whatever works, we will give it a try. If it doesn't work, we will throw it out and we'll try something new. I think we have been quite fortunate that through this trial and error over the years, and of course we have also depended a lot on the experiences of other people, other countries, how they have done certain things. We take the best practices around the world, bring it back to Singapore, adapt it to our own local conditions, and we try it out. It doesn't work, we try something else. And even today, until today, it's the same thing. We have never stopped learning, and we continue to look for what is the best international practices, and we bring it back to Singapore. But of course, today is a little bit different. I mean, given the current level of development, there are not very many examples, of what we could do, because we are now more or less at the cutting edge of development. So what we do now is we look for partners who are facing similar situations and challenges as us, and together we work together to develop the solutions and strategies. So here in Korea, that's what we do, and that's what my job is. We have many study groups who come to Korea. We share each other's experiences and problems, and together we try to come up with the ideas and solutions on how to tackle them. I think Jeju. That's what. If there's anything that you can take reference from Singapore on, is to do the same. I mean, maintain this as an open city, and to welcome ideas and also try to adapt the ideas that you get from other places and to your own conditions, and to find what works here and what is the best for Jeju and the Jeju people. Thank you.
네. 혹시 또 추가 질문 있을까요?
I think you lastly emphasized the capacity of cities. What was your special strategy or policy to raise up the capacity of the cities of people?
Thank you. In Singapore, it's a small place. We don't have resources. The only kind of resources we have are our people. So this is the only thing that we have to work with, and which is why the Singapore government has all along placed a lot of emphasis on developing the human resource. We have been fortunate that we have had, a stable political environment. Government is able to implement long-term policies, because education and human resource development takes many years to see the outcome. So again, a lot of it is driven by pragmatism. So take, for example, from the very beginning when Mr. Lee started developing the country, he had insisted on maintaining a bilingual education policy. So this means that from young, all Singapore children study two languages. And again, the pragmatism of Mr. Lee Kuan Yew is that he insisted that English is the first language. And this is very unusual for an Asian society, let's say Asian country, where most countries emphasizes their own local language. Mr. Lee, because of pragmatism, insisted on English as the first language. And it has got other reasons apart from the economic value, because we are a multicultural society, and you need to unite the people, and you need to have a common language for communication. But you know, the choice of English as the first language has worked out quite well for us. Maybe in a way a little bit fortunate. You know, so we have in Singapore, you know, English is our not only the language of education. All subjects are taught in English. Government work is all conducted in English. Of course, you know, business is conducted in English. So that has been quite fortunate for us, because now, you know, modern technology, internet, English has become very important. So, you know, education is very important. And it's not just about the language. Of course, the government has also done a lot of adjustments and tweaking of our education policies over the years. The focus is always, the principle is always how to develop the people to achieve their best potential. So, and in more recent years, as we are now facing this challenge of how to prepare our people for what they call the fourth industrial revolution, we have never stopped encouraging the people to be retrained and to be re-educated. We have a philosophy and a concept of lifelong learning. So everybody needs to be continued to retrain and to be re-educated throughout. So as I was mentioning, the last 2 years, the government had to come up with new strategies to position ourselves for the longer term, because we are facing a big disruption to the economy. Whereas, you know, in the past, the people who lose their jobs are vulnerable are the blue-collar workers, because industries have upgraded. You know, they find that, you know, factories no longer require so many people. But in more recent years, the people who are losing their jobs are people in the management, in the professionals, people with technical skills, and these are the white-collar workers. And even they are now facing a big problem of losing the jobs and being no longer being able to find similar jobs when they lose their jobs. So we are now putting a lot of focus on retraining, even for adults, people who lose their jobs in their 40s and 50s. Government is providing a lot of help for them to find new skills so that they can move to a different industry. It is difficult. It's difficult, but we continue to do this. Yeah, thank you.
네, 다시 한번 오늘 좋은 말씀 해주신 우리 위케이 키아 싱가포르 대사님께 다시 한번 큰 박수 부탁드리겠습니다.